Hey everybody, we're here in chapter 5, specifically 5.2. This is on carbohydrates. What do you think of when you think of the word carbohydrate? Well, I'm going to tell you it comes in a variety of forms. Primarily, I think people use the word sugar and carbohydrate interchangeably. You know, if I think of carbohydrate, I think of pasta. I think of stuff that's going to give me fuel, essentially. You know, you can look on the side of any food item in America, and they will tell you the carbohydrates over here. This has 26 grams of carbohydrate per serving. It says dietary fiber. That's something we'll talk about in a little bit. And sugars. So anyway, let's clear up all the confusion about what a carbohydrate is. I love this chapter because it's relevant. We deal with these polymers all the time, and we take them in as living organisms. These proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and nucleic acids, we break them down into individual monomers, and then we put them back together in polymers that we can actually use. And that's guided by our DNA, which amino acids go into which sequence when we do that. And then the enzymes will then create carbos that we want, or different nucleic acids that we want. It's really cool how it all comes together with genetics as well. So let's get started. So I always thought that carbohydrate was sugar, and it kind of is. Let's watch 2 video clips, and maybe that will cause more confusion or help clear it up. In a moment, we'll watch those. It's late. Let's do this first. There's a summary at the back of chapter 5, and let's go there. I'm going to read this to you. It says carbohydrates serve as fuel or building material. Most of what we're going to be talking about here is fuel, and that's just finally way down here in the bottom right-hand corner, we'll talk about building material. The primary carbohydrate that we'll be dealing with is glucose. That's a monosaccharide monomer. Saccharide just means sugar, mono means one. Primarily this is glucose, which has come from photosynthesis in plants. There's tons of glucose made every second on this planet. It is the primary fuel that we burn, and we also use it as building material in our bodies. It has a lot of atoms in it. There's a lot of energy stored in the covalent bonds between those atoms. And just remember, it's polar, and it's C6H12O6, but this chapter will show you some other variations of that too. Well, there's monosaccharides, there's disaccharides, and then there's these polysaccharides over here, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And then just understand that it's used as fuel or building material. We'll get to all those details. Here's the movies.
Carbs. They've been both praised and punished, in part because they're largely misunderstood. When I say the word carb, you probably picture bread, rice, and potatoes, and you'd be right. But you'd be just as right if fruits or vegetables or brown rice popped into your head. And you'd still be right if you thought of sugar or honey or jam or even a glass of milk. That's because lots of foods supply carbohydrate. And it's a good thing too, because when it comes to keeping your engine running, carbs play an important role. So we get our carbs from a wide range of foods, but clearly some of them are healthier for us than others. That's why we sometimes talk about good or bad carbohydrates. The good carbohydrates are the ones we think of as being the least processed, foods like whole fruits, vegetables, dairy products, beans, and whole grains. Dairy products provide carbohydrate in the form of naturally occurring sugars, and these good carbs provide more than just energy to the body. They can provide us with vitamins, minerals, fiber, and natural antioxidants too. On the other hand, the highly processed refined carbs, foods like sugars, pastries, and white flour bread, cereals, and crackers, have little to offer the body beyond just calories. So it makes sense that we should focus on the good carbs as much as we can, since so many other healthy nutrients tag along.
All right, confused about what you should eat? Well, let's get moving here. So carbohydrates are used as fuel and building material. You'll see that picture up there of glucose. I told you it's the primary carbohydrate because it's made through photosynthesis, through fungus. Some animals do photosynthesis, bacteria do, and plants do. It's using carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from somewhere, I guess soil, into roots, and then using the sun's energy to put that energy right here in these bonds between these atoms. This is what glucose looks like. It basically looks like flour. It's just a white powder. This is called dextrose. It's just glucose in the presence of water. The reason why it has to be stored in the presence of water is because you see there all those hydroxyl groups, those OHs, and you know that there's a polar covalent bond between those oxygens and hydrogens, meaning electrons are shared unequally, which means that there's a dipole on the oxygen and on the hydrogen atom of those hydroxyl groups. And so they're going to have these positively and negatively tended atoms, and water is going to be able to form shells around this. That's a big component of glucose, and we'll get to some ramifications of that in a second. So usually it's multiples of CH2O, which means you could put a 2 in front of that, you could put a 6 in front of that. And if you were to put a 6 in front of that, you would get C6H12O6 for these monosaccharides. There's tons of monosaccharides in here, and this is good stuff for you to consume when you're burning fuel. This is bad if you lay on the couch all day and you just chug Cokes or Gatorade or whatever. The problem is that because water is needed to surround the glucose molecule, your body doesn't like that, and it's super inefficient. It uses up water, it takes up a lot of space, so your body converts it to fat. Have you ever heard people say, oh, I'm not eating carbs, or oh, I don't want to eat that wonderful bread from that bakery because I'll get fat? Well, the bread isn't lipid or fat, it's carbohydrate. But what happens is if you don't burn it, it will turn to fat. So if you're exercising or burning a ton of calories, by all means, don't drink water. Drink something that will give you electrolytes like potassium and potassium and sodium, and then also glucose. What's the most common monosaccharide? I'll write that right here. It's the one that we're going to be studying the most, and you'll see it often talked about in this portion of the chapter. Here's some other monosaccharides. We see ribose, glucose, galactose. What do you notice when you look at all of these? They just look like variations of each other, maybe a little bit longer. They all seem to have that C double bond O, that carbonyl group up there at the top. Remember, if a carbonyl group is at the end, the compound, or the molecule is called an aldose, and if it's in the middle, it's called a ketose. Now, I've given you this picture, and which one of these are aldoses? Well, all of them are, because the C double bond O is at the end. The only one in your book is fructose that's a ketose, where the C double bond O is in the middle, and that's going to cause it to just be a five carbon ring. It's not even that, but it's just different than this glucose. Let me show you what this glucose looks like. Here it is. Life exists in an aqueous environment, and I told you that water likes to surround this thing. So often you don't find it in a linear form, a line form. You find it in a ring form. What I would like you to do, it's this important, is pause this video and somewhere in some note somewhere, draw it. Draw that thing that's over there on the right side. You don't need to draw its transformation, but draw it. Take a moment, really study where the hydrogens and carbons go. You can see there that you can name the carbons going in a clockwise fashion. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the sixth one is not in the ring structure. It's actually off the top. Well, if we wanted to put two of these together, what kind of reaction do you think we would use? You're right, a dehydration reaction. We just learned that in 5.1. Hydroxyl group from one monomer comes together with a hydrogen atom from another. Water is liberated off, that's dehydration. You can see then that there's an ester bond created between the number 1 carbon of one of the monomers and the number 4 carbon of the other. Go ahead and look at that at the top right of your picture here. See that ester bond? This is a disaccharide. 2 representative disaccharides that we'll be learning about here are fructose and sucrose. And also, that's not true, maltose and sucrose. Fructose is a type of fruit sugar, and it's actually a monosaccharide. You'll learn about that in the book. But maltose and sucrose, we're going to go over each of these. Well, here's maltose. Maltose is gross. It probably doesn't really taste very good, to be honest with you. It's like, imagine like molasses without the kind of sugary component. Also, like if you were to take like wheat or rye or barley and grind them up, that's maltose. It's a type of sugar. It's a disaccharide, and it's formed through a dehydration reaction when 2 glucoses get together. So you can imagine that plants are very good at making this. They make glucose monomers in the chloroplasts of their photosynthetic areas, like let's say pine needles or leaves or whatever. Through a dehydration reaction, they put them together. You get maltose. Doesn't taste very good. What happens is that we have this stuff called salivary amylase in our mouth, and it helps us break down long polymers of sugar called polysaccharides. That's called starch, is the kind of the storage form of that in plants. We break up those thousands of kind of monomers into these dual things called maltose here. This is a 1 to 4 linkage between those 2 carbons. You know, I used to, in order to test everyone's ability to make maltose, I would give kids saltine crackers, and you know the challenge where you would see if you could eat 6 of them in a minute or something like that. And it all comes down to how much saliva you're able to create. Often people have a dry mouth or unable to make saliva, and they're unable to do it. I had a student a couple years ago, Mr. Cope is a teacher here, and his son did it in class, and he literally almost died. He had all this white powder in his mouth, and he couldn't get a breath. And so now I just give kids 3 crackers, but let's see if Furious Pete can do 9 crackers in a minute.
30 and let's go. First 6 gone. That's 9. I'll go for another one, but my ball's ringing.
All right. Let's talk about sucrose. Sucrose is cane sugar. Sucrose is created when a glucose comes together with a fructose in a dehydration reaction. Notice that like I said earlier, that the fructose is a penta, which means it's a 5-carbon sugar. Has 4 carbons in the innermost ring there, and then 1 on top. You can see the oxygen atom also embedded in the ring. It's not a hexamonomer. The point is they come together, and that fruit sugar or fructose makes it taste good to our taste receptors in our mouth, and that's cane sugar. Now we can also see this as maple syrup. This is just stuff that's made through photosynthesis, and then plants are trying to store this down in their roots, and there's sugar cane right there. Here's unrefined cane sugar. The problem with that white cane sugar is that it's been it's been processed, and it's not very good for you. Here's real cane sugar. A student got this for me. If you ever fly into Maui, right as you're landing, if you look down to the left side of the plane, you'll see this old cane sugar refinery there, where they would process these sugar canes. It's old, beat up, and I think it's a museum now. So anyway, I've never tasted this, but I bet it tastes really good.
Sometimes organisms link sugar molecules in pairs to form disaccharides. Here are several examples. Plants make sucrose by joining glucose and fructose. Sucrose circulates in plant sap, and we obtain it from sugarcane and sugar beets and use it as table sugar. Lactose is formed by joining galactose and glucose. Lactose is the disaccharide that gives milk its sweet taste. Maltose consists of two linked glucose molecules. Digestion of starch in a sprouting seed or in the intestine of an animal produces this disaccharide.
Well, go ahead. Let's press pause for a moment and tell your favorite stuffed animal all you know about mono and disaccharides. Well, all right, let's start putting these mono and disaccharides together through dehydration reactions to make what plants really like to make, and that is polysaccharides, hundreds or thousands of these things in a row. They're either going to have an energy storage or a structural role here. Many sugar building blocks. Let me show you a picture that's on page 70 in the 10th edition. Here it is. We're going to be going over this picture, so maybe go there or use it if I gave you a handout here.
Polysaccharides are polymers, long chains consisting of hundreds to thousands of linked monosaccharides. Polysaccharides are polymers, long chains consisting of hundreds to thousands of linked monosaccharides.
Okay, I showed that to you twice because you can see the dehydration reaction when they come together, and then the three representative ones that we're going to be talking about are starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Well, you can see here a chloroplast that exists in a plant cell here. I'm thrown off because that's pointing to a chloroplast. The chloroplast is kind of the flattened, thick green disc in the middle of that picture there of that organelle. That is the organelle, and then starch can be created there. You can see here what they're showing is that starch is being made, and what starch is an energy storage molecule for plants. They pump out tons and tons of glucose monomers. They put them together in these long chains, and then they send them down to the trunk or the roots in order to be stored as energy for later for the plant, like let's say in the wintertime when they don't have leaves any longer. See the chloroplast and the starch there. What we like to do is sometimes hijack those starch areas. I like to call them starch bombs, like a beet or an onion or a carrot or a potato. These things are just basically full of starch. They're great for energy, and this is what you want to use to fuel up before the race, because you take it and you now have millions of these little glucose monomers that are all put together in these long polymers, and when you get it in your body, your digestive system is going to cut those little monomers off, send them into the bloodstream. They're going to go to your cells, and in the mitochondria of your cells, they're going to go in, and in the presence of oxygen in the mitochondria, they're going to be burned. Those bonds are going to be broken, and then that's going to be used to create ATP, which is the energy storage molecule that we use to contract our muscles and help our heart beat and help us think and our eyes to focus and all those things. Well, I've written down here blood sugar, when to exercise, and insulin. So let's press pause for a second. So starch is important. Here it is. Here's an example of cornstarch from corn. Again, it's the same thing. It's just a white powder. It probably tastes like cardboard. It's just energy storage. What happens is that when we eat anything that has carbohydrate, then we get these glucose monomers in our bloodstream, and the pancreas is stimulated, the beta cells in pancreas is stimulated to secrete insulin. What insulin does is it goes to the areas where we store glucose, such as fat, the liver, and our muscles, and it opens up these channels, and then the glucose goes in and it's stored for later. And then as you know, so 8 hours for the next 8 hours, you're basically using the blood sugar that you have plus these reserves, these glucose reserves that are going to be coming out of these areas into the bloodstream. And then the glucose is going to go to the mitochondria, and it's going to be used to create ATP. When it gets into, let's say, our liver or muscles, it's turned into something called glycogen. That's our energy storage product. So we take the starch, we cut off the individual monomers, and then we remake that into a different structure. And then when it's summoned, when the body says, oh gosh, I need some of that energy, we had a carbo dinner last night and the big race is today, then a hormone called glucagon that's produced by the pancreas is going to then cause the glycogen to be brought back out into the bloodstream. So it's a big cycle. If someone is diabetic, it happens either one of two ways. Either they're born without the ability to make insulin. There's a problem with the pancreas, and so they have trouble storing glucose as glycogen. So they're always regulating their blood sugar and trying to see where it is, because if the blood sugar gets too high, it could be bad for your kidneys and your eyes, and I believe circulation in the extremities, feet and hands. And they don't want the blood sugar to be too low, or else they won't have enough oxygen. However, I must tell you about the second most prevalent adult onset disease in America, and that's called diabetes mellitus, or diabetes type 2. And what that is that individuals who have, you ever go to a supermarket and you see people's carts? I want you to look at people's carts the next time you go in there, and look at your own cart. If you have a bunch of stuff that's wrapped in cellophane and with colors and all this stuff, Wonder Breads and frozen pizzas and all this stuff and all, it's just this refined carbohydrate that isn't very good for you. What happens is that every time you eat it, it spikes your insulin levels, and then the insulin goes to all these places and tries to store the glucose as glycogen, and then the insulin level crashes. And then all of a sudden, even though you just ate a McDonald's hamburger 2 hours ago, you're hungry again. And so then you spike it again and it goes down and so on. And so what happens in many people in America is they spike their insulin so many times, throughout the thousands of times throughout their life, by drinking 2-liter bottles of Coke day after day after day, that eventually the muscle and the liver don't respond to the insulin any longer. And the insulin is being created, but this whole system doesn't work. And so they have diabetes, meaning they can't store the glucose as glycogen. That's adult onset diabetes. So be careful with what you eat. So what's a good carbohydrate? Complex carbohydrates, like anything that's whole grain or darker, kind of leafy vegetables, or darker breads, anything that you know is good for you, that's going to be slower to digest. It's longer. It's not these individual monomers of sugar that are going to spike the insulin level like a Gatorade is. It's like just you know what I'm talking about. It's deeper, richer, whole grain, complex carbohydrates, and it's just going to take longer for the insulin to work. And it's going to keep you fuller longer, keep you more energetic longer, and so on. So the last thing I have up here is when to exercise. So if you want to lose weight, the best time to exercise is in the morning. And I'm going to tell you why. Because at night, or before breakfast, at night you eat, and then that's fine. You have some blood sugar, you store some glucose as glycogen, and then all night long you're burning that. And then first thing in the morning, you basically have no blood sugar. So the next source of energy for the body are lipids, which are fats. And so if you want to burn fat, work out in the morning, or don't do this. Don't eat a meal and then half hour later say, oh, I've digested my meal, and then go work out. You're not going to burn any fat. You're just going to burn all that sugar that you have in your body. So probably the best way to do it is either in the morning, or if you eat small meals throughout the day, just keep a little bit of blood sugar going. You don't really have a chance to store anything as fat because you're just burning everything all the time. So take that under advisement. Here's what glycogen looks like. The whole purpose of me showing you the picture of the starch and the glycogen is just notice that they're branched, that they have all these glucose monomers, and they're kind of diffuse and they're branched. And you can imagine an enzyme in our digestive system getting in there and snapping off these little monomers. They look very accessible. What doesn't look accessible is cellulose, and we'll get to that in just a moment. We store glycogen mainly in liver and muscle cells, about 2 pounds of stored glucose as glycogen at any one time, about an hour after a big meal.
Diabetes affects the pancreas, an organ of the digestive system. An important function of the pancreas is to make hormones that regulate blood glucose levels. Insulin is produced by beta cells, which cluster in groups called islets. Insulin is a hormone that lowers blood glucose levels. After a meal, glucose reaches the pancreas via the bloodstream and is released from capillaries into the pancreatic tissue. This triggers the release of insulin, which is stored inside the beta cells. The insulin travels to other parts of the body via the bloodstream with three main destinations: muscle, fat, and liver. Insulin helps these tissues to store glucose as an energy source. Shown here are muscle cells. Insulin arrives through the fine capillary network that traverses the muscle fibers. The synthesis of muscle, fat, and liver cells are probably insulin receptors. When these receptors bind insulin, their signal to the cells to release special glucose transport channels onto the cell surface. These channels enable glucose to gain entry into the cells, allowing the cells to store glucose as energy for future use. In this way, insulin helps to regulate blood glucose levels.
Okay, thanks. We're back with this stuff. This is cellulose. Cellulose, I told you earlier in this course, is produced, they think, at about 1 billion pounds per second on this planet, every second. And it's just a bunch of glucose monomers put together in a glucose polymer, a polysaccharide, but it's shaped a little bit differently than starch and glycogen. Here it is. This was purchased in 1984. Where were you in 1980? It was a good year, I'm not gonna lie. It just looks like the rest of them, probably tastes terrible. Cellulose. The thing is that we can't digest cellulose. So why would you ever eat a salad? Why would you ever eat a banana or a watermelon or a cherry or an apple? The idea is that if you eat a piece of fruit, you're not only going to get water, but you're going to get vitamins and minerals. You're going to get some sugars in there, some fructose and stuff. But a lot of it's going to pass right through you. And it's not a bad thing to move the train from the station. In fact, colon cancer is the number 3 leading cause of cancer in America, and it's the number 2 leading cause of cancer death in America. What happens is as you eat fiber, stuff that you can't digest, it helps to keep you regular or move stuff along. And that's not a bad thing to have a salad and have that happen and have it happen regularly. What happens is that these polyps or abnormal cell growths occur in the colon. Now, here's your anatomy lesson. So you have your anus, then you have your anal sphincter, which holds in your poop before it's evacuated. It's just a circular sphincter muscle. And then so let me come from the mouth. So esophagus, stomach, you have the small intestine, and then in the large intestine, you have the ascending, transverse, and descending portion of your large intestine right before the colon where you store your poop before it's evacuated. But the point is that this is the area. It's the colon is just your large intestine, and that's where a lot of final digestive stuff occurs. A lot of reabsorption of kind of the chyme or the liquid from your stomach occurs, and you kind of pull back all of the the water and the minerals and stuff like that, and then you create a harder thing called poop. It's just not a liquidy solution. But the point is that that's where we're talking about. This picture says colonoscopy. So that's a scope that goes up your colon. Now, I've never had a colonoscopy, but I'm probably going to have one soon. And if colon cancer doesn't run in your family, it's recommended that you get one of these after the age of 50. And the idea is that the doctor can go in there and look and see these little polyps. And I think now at the end of the scope, they have a little hot thing or a laser or something where he or she can actually do the work right there and get rid of this. Why I'm telling you all this is that your diet is super important, and that this is one of the most preventable cancers, in addition to, say, skin cancer if you just cover up or wear sunscreen, or lung cancer if you don't smoke. Some people get lung cancer without smoking. But the point is just take care of your digestive system, please. For most people, they have good colon health, and just keep it that way by keeping things moving along and exercising. And my wife and I were listening to NPR one night. It was late. We were driving in southern Colorado, and I'll never forget it. They said that John Wayne, who was an American actor in Western movies, he had died. And they had done an autopsy on him, and they found in his colon 44 pounds of undigested red meat packed along the walls of his colon. And so there's a lot of stuff in there. Let me give you another story. So my wife's hippie friend in Northern California, where my wife worked at an organic garden, this lady's name is Kara. And I'll never forget, I was talking to Kara one night, and she said, I had a colon cleansing. And I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. Basically, it's a hose, and you can see, I don't know why this lady is smiling. You can see this lady has placed this hose in the anus of my friend Kara, or this person on this picture, and basically rinsed out her anus and her colon, essentially. And she said that she lost 5 pounds in that night. And she said, I couldn't believe it because the technician told me that they found so much corn that was coming out of my rear end. And what I found so curious about that was that I haven't had corn in 6 months. I know that wrestlers use this, models use this. It's one way to use cellulose to your advantage. So let me show you the structural difference between these things and then cellulose. It's all about these linkages here, these glycosidic linkages. So find this picture. You're going to see that cellulose is very strong. It's used in plant cell walls, and this is the reason why. It's not branched or diffuse. It's super linear, and you can see these things are stacking on each other. They create like ropes. Think of like hemp rope or any rope. It's just really strong and stiff. If you look at this at a macro level, for instance. See, it's used in cell walls, and I would write down the word hydrogen bonding. What happens here as a result of the formation of these glucoses is that they're able to hydrogen bond with other strings or polysaccharides here. And so they create super strong, bonds there, and it's really tough to break. That's why when we eat cellulose, we can't digest it because we don't have an enzyme that can go in there and break these individual glucose monomers off. But some individuals on our planet do, and we'll get to that in just a second. Here's the reason why. So plants do photosynthesis, and they create 2 monomers of glucose, the alpha or the beta monomer. And you can see that the difference here is that the hydroxyl group on the 1' carbon is either up or down. And that has huge ramifications for the secondary structure. Alpha and beta ring forms. See that here. So what happens then, as these glucoses come together, based on the hydroxyl group formation and the 1' carbon, they either get a cis or a trans configuration when the glucoses start to bind to make the polymer here. So for starch, in the formation of starch in plants, you can see here that as a result of the hydroxyl group being a certain way in the alpha monomer, it causes the hydroxyl group in the 2' carbon to just be in a row down there at the bottom. You see that down there below the glucoses? That enables it to make that wavy structure and then make it available for the plant as well as us to break that down and get those individual monomers for energy. Well, cellulose, on the other hand, has that hydroxyl group on the number 1 carbon that's flipped, and that causes it, you see here in this picture, you can see that the whole glucose molecule is flipped. You see how Every other one has the oxygen atom in the ring structure that's flipped over, which I can point to this. The point is then that causes the number 2 carbon to have the hydroxyl group that's going opposite. You see how that works like that, top and the bottom of those. Well, this has huge ramifications when they come together because all the glucose monomers are flipped in this polysaccharide and the hydroxyl groups on the number 2 carbon are flipped. That enables, well, those hydrogen bonds to take place between the polysaccharides. This is important. I'm going to test you on this. So press pause, go back over this again. You really have to understand this, the difference between the alpha and the beta monomer of glucose and the ramifications for that when those get put together in long chains for the secondary structure, which would be the diffuse structure of these guys or the kind of the linear structure and the hydrogen bonding of the cellulose. Well, who can break down cellulose? Herbivores are able to digest cellulose, but only with the help of bacteria. So you think of a cow or a bunny or a squirrel or a deer, and they're able to eat grass and leaves and stuff all day long. There's a ton of cellulose in there, but they can't digest that. They have bacteria in their stomachs which can digest that and then get those individual glucose monomers off the cellulose polymer in order to use them for energy. You know, at Cal Poly, where I did my undergraduate work, we had this cow with like a plastic side, and you could see all of the stomachs on the cow. And the cow would like throw up from stomach 4 and start chewing. You know, cows just chew and chew and chew even when they're not taking up stuff from the ground. And then you swallow it, you go to stomach 2, and then kind of bathe in there, and all these enzymes and these bacteria break it down and then kind of regurgitate something from stomach 4 and so on. It was really interesting. This is a symbiotic relationship with these microbes. Well, here's the deal. When we take the test on chapters 4 and 5, I'm going to give you the essay prompts. Here they are. These are called essential knowledge items, and they're from the College Board. They're from the College Board, and I'm basically going to give you a prompt, which is something that the College Board says every student needs to know, and it's fair game if they ask a question on the AP exam on these essential bits of knowledge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you that as a prompt. For instance, here it is, and then I'm going to have you tell me all you know about this. So let's read this together. Carbs are composed of sugar monomers whose structures and bonding with each other by dehydration synthesis determine the properties and functions of the molecules. So basically, you would talk about the different types of bonding and then the different types of structures that we just went over here between these guys in order to show me mastery of this essential knowledge item from the College Board. Here's another one. This talks more about like the alpha and the beta subunits and then how that kind of has ramifications for us to be able to use them in certain ways or plants to be able to use them in certain ways or our inability to break them down or our ability to break them. You're talking about these things. So just review the video if you need to. That's why this took so long, is because we had to get here to the end because you had to be able to show me that you understand this stuff for the College Board. These are things that they're going to test you on the AP exam. Well, thanks, everybody. I hope that was informative. And read the labels on the side of your food and look for the carbohydrate content.